One type of individual is those individuals that have overcome their humanness enough that when the end of this age is complete, when the war is over, the spading complete, there is nothing left here except for recycling.
JANJA LALICH, thank you very much indeed for coming back on to Talk Beliefs from your home in Walnut Creek, California. Now, you are a researcher, author, educator, and professor emerita of sociology at California State University, Chico. You have studied and taught about the subjects of cults for 30 years, and you've written several books, including Take Back Your Life, Escaping Utopia, and Bounded Choice. Now, last time we spoke about the NXIVM leader Keith Raniere and his recent trial on which you were an observer. Today, we'll be diving into the Heaven's Gate UFO cult and some never-before-revealed details, and your involvement in alerting the world of its tragic end. So how have you been doing, JANJA? You really seem to be in demand lately. Not only have we seen you on the recent NXIVM documentaries, but you appear in the HBO Max documentary about Heaven's Gate as well.
Yes, it's been a really busy time. I think ever since the fall, when the two documentaries about NXIVM came out, I've just had a flurry of email, both from media people as well as people who've been in cults or who know someone who's in a cult and wanted advice, and it's been pretty crazy.
Right. For anyone who doesn't know about the Heaven's Gate sect, let's just begin with an overview of the group. JANJA, when did Heaven's Gate begin? Who were the main players, and what do they believe?
Well, the group started with the two leaders, as most groups do, the T and Doe, who were Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, were their actual human names. They met in Texas, and he was at a vulnerable point in his life. He'd been struggling with being gay and was divorced and some other issues. He had been a music teacher at a university or college. And when they met, she was a nurse, but she was very, very involved with kind of New Age things. She was a theosophist, which is a form of ideology, a New Age ideology, theosophy. She was doing seances and things like that. And anyway, she convinced him that he was her soulmate, and he moved in with her. There was never a romantic relationship, but they got very close. Then they traveled across the country. This is in the, 74, around 74, 75. They spent some time in the woods in California. And when they came out of the woods, they said that they believed they were the two from the Bible, from Revelations, and that they were here to bring the message that the end was about to come, and that those people who followed them would be saved and would be taken away from this earth to what they called the next level above human. They wandered around, just the two of them, for a while, visiting churches, saying their message, which didn't gain much traction. And then they actually met up with a group in Hollywood. They were invited by a guy who was sort of a guru to this group of, a couple dozen people. And they had a meeting at a house in Hollywood and told people who they were, that they were these aliens. They were from outer space. So they basically, told their story to this crowd in this Hollywood living room and said for those who wanted to follow them to reach this salvation, they should meet them at a certain day, a certain time, a certain day. Well, a number of people from that group did go, including the guy who was the sort of leader of that group, which probably helped bring along some of the followers. And that was the beginnings of the Heaven's Gate cult, which wasn't called that at the time. And then they went around mostly the West Coast, putting up flyers and giving these talks and gathering up followers along the way.
It doesn't sound that different to a lot of cults the way they start. You know, somebody meets someone else and they convince themselves on this retreat that they are special. I seem to have heard this before.
Yes, I mean it's a kind of common beginning. They clearly, they were in, I guess, what you could call a folie à deux. The two of them reinforced each other. She was very much the stronger force among the two. And I think that, people tend to think of Marshall Applewhite as the leader, since he was the one at the end when they committed suicide. But most of their existence, Bonnie, or T as she called herself, was actually very much the leader of the group in terms of ideology as well as their practices.
Okay, so the cult today is largely seen as having been led by Marshall Applewhite, known within the group as Doe, and also by a woman known as T, who shared leadership with Doe until her death in 1985. As much as Marshall Applewhite seemed to be the prime mover of this cult, T actually held more sway over things than most people realize. Isn't that right?
Yes, and I think that's because Doe was much more the visible presence of the group. Even in the early years when they went around and gave their talks, they'd be sitting up at a table and Doe would do most of the talking and T would just kind of sit there with a peaceful look on her face. Doe was clearly the more charismatic one. As I mentioned, he had been a music teacher. Even people who knew him in those years when he was at the college, described him as charismatic, that he had these blue eyes that looked right into you, and that he was somebody who was a very convincing person. So because he had that persona in the beginning of being the one who did most of the talking, even back then people saw him as the primary leader, at least people outside the group.
Yes.
And then as time went on and T died, which was was one of the issues they had to deal with in terms of kind of reshaping their ideology, because they believed they weren't human. So T died of a very human disease, which is cancer, and so they had to reframe. And then from those years on, from 85 on, well, Doe was the leader, but he was very, when all of this happened, he was quite upset, and obviously upset at losing her, but also he didn't think he could carry on. He didn't think he had the wherewithal to do it. And actually his followers more or less kind of convinced him that he could do it and that he could do it. And they had a ceremony, which I believe he prearranged with T before she died. They had a kind of wedding ceremony where they got these wedding rings and they became married to Doe. And then that made him, sort of reinforced him as the leader after that point.
Would you say, Janja, that because most cult leaders are usually men, not always, that when he reluctantly had to take over, perhaps it sort of boosted the cult in a way?
Well, I think we do see that most cults are led by men, although not all. There are certainly female cult leaders. Insofar as anyone knew what was going on inside of the group, which wasn't much. I mean, there weren't that many people who were aware of what was going on. Perhaps they took it more seriously. It would have been primarily the families who lost someone to the group, who even tried to keep in touch and know what was going on. And, now and then they were allowed to visit home with another member. I don't know. I don't know that really made a big difference to the outside world. I think the longevity was beginning to trouble people. Now it had been more than 10 years that the group was in existence. And they kept being sequestered, and that's always a concern.
Hello?
Yes, I need to report an anonymous tip. Who do I talk to?
Okay. This is regarding what?
This is regarding a mass suicide, and I can give you the address.
people saw the horrible mass suicide of the Heaven's Gate group members on the news in 1997, a news item almost as big as the Jonestown cult massacre 2 decades previously. Janja, why did this group feel so strongly that they had to take their own lives?
In my opinion, it had to do with a few things. One is that when the group first started, T and Do preached that the end was coming now. It was supposed to come at any moment. And they'd always be waiting for these spaceships to pick them up, and it was coming any moment. And of course, then the months went on, and then the years went on. By 1997, most of the members had been in the group for over 20 years. I mean, it was the only life they knew at that point. There were several members who joined in the mid-90s, but very few, I think 5 or 6. And so I think they were tired. They were tired of living that lifestyle of waiting and waiting and waiting for the end. And then, there are different stories or rumors or, people telling various versions. But one story was that Do believed that he had cancer and that he was going to die soon anyway. I don't know that that's actually ever been verified. I think primarily they were just tired and they were ready to go. And so when the cosmic occurrence of the Hale-Bopp comet was happening, which was like a perfect marker for them, it was a perfect, signal from outer space that this was their time. I mean, they just latched onto that as their way out. It's tragic in the sense that they always said, in the beginning, they would never commit suicide, that this wasn't about suicide. I mean, they truly believed that they would be lifted up once they completed their training, and that they would be taken to this next level above human. So the tragedy is obviously that didn't happen, and that they got to the point where they did have to take their lives. Although it's again important to remember that they didn't see it as taking their lives. They saw, and he says this in his final speech, they saw staying here on Earth as suicide.
It is suicide to not leave. It is to take life, to leave this body behind.
And that they were actually choosing life.
So like a lot of cult leaders or anyone who's coercive, they can frame things which are quite awful on the surface in a way that other people will see them as a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And that's why I think when we study cults, or when we look at cults, it's really important, I think, to try to put yourself in their shoes and try to understand the world that they're living in, and the ideology that they've internalized, because otherwise they just look like freaks, right? And people who join cults aren't freaks.
It's a drip feed as well, isn't it? They don't just believe all these things the moment they walk in the door.
Exactly. I mean, it's a process, and so I think we need to really be cautious when we examine these groups, to not be judgmental, to not criticize until we really understand what is this about.
Because what you and I hear quite a bit is that, I wouldn't have joined a cult. It's obviously, it attracts stupid people, but really the opposite is true.
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely, what could be described as A-type personalities who get recruited into cults. I mean, that's who cults look for. They look for people who can, run their businesses, who can bring in money, who can bring in contacts to lend legitimacy. I mean, they don't want losers. They don't want lazy people.
Well, what people may not know is that you were the first person to figure out who the individual suicide victims were. So tell us about that.
When the incident happened, that evening, I had been at a book reading in San Francisco, at a bookstore where someone was reading their book. I wasn't reading one of my books, just to be clear. And when I got home, my partner said, you know, hold on, you know, things, the so-called shit, it's going to hit the fan. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, there was some kind of group suicide in San Diego, and it was all over the radio and on television. And so I got on the computer and I started pecking around, and they kept saying it was men, it was, 39 monks, and I was talking to other people in my field over the phone. It got to be midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. And finally, at some point, the police, I believe, or somebody released their website with this Heaven's Gate logo and some of their teachings. And the minute I looked at that, I knew it was T and Do. We used to call them the Bo Peep cult, because for a time they were called Bo and Peep. They weren't known as Heaven's Gate until after that incident. So I immediately knew it was that group, and I started calling the San Diego police to let them know. Of course, I guess they just thought I was a crank. Nobody called back. And then eventually they figured it out as well. And then the media started airing what we call the goodbye videos, where first, the night before, Doe gave a talk in front of all of his followers, dressed in their, what they called their away team uniforms. And he gave a talk to them that they videoed. And then the next day they sat outside of this mansion where they were living in the backyard. And mostly in twos, they each had like 3 minutes to say their goodbye, say whatever they wanted to the world. And so pair after pair after pair gave their talk, and these 2 videos were sent to media all over the country.
Well, I just want to let everyone know how lucky and happy I feel to be here, and let you know that what we're about to do is certainly nothing to think negatively about. We're all choosing of our own free will, go to the next level with T and Do. And they are certainly not what the media is going to paint them out to be. I never got to meet T in this incarnation in her human vehicle, but I can tell you that Do is the most special, dignified, unhuman, objective person that you can ever meet. That's right. He has helped us so much and put up with so much and never done anything that seemed even close to the way a human would respond. And I guess that's really all I want to say.
I couldn't have had a better life than I've had these 21 years. And if it was good here, I know it's going to be twice as good when I get up there. And we're looking forward to it. And it's been fun all the way. It'll be more fun going.
I did want to recommend on our website, we have a picture of what we feel like a member of the next level might look like. Because the next level isn't just non-physical. They do have bodies, even though their physical characteristics are different than what are here. But we don't know if it's entirely accurate, but we feel like because of the way Do helped bring that picture about, and that he feels so good about it, that it must be very close to what we're looking forward to being in our next level bodies.
So once these videos hit the air, I knew that this was going to be really troubling, especially for a family that I was working with, whose daughter had joined the group, and I had been working with them for, I think, over a year at that time, trying to find out more and see if we could get her to come home. And so I called them. It was probably the hardest phone call I ever made. And he answered the phone, the father, and I said, I need you to be aware that there's some things on television right now that if you watch, it's going to be very hard for you, because your daughter is among those people who committed suicide. And yeah, so that was a really hard day for me.
Yeah, and this is something I don't think you revealed in the recent Heaven's Gate documentary.
No, I don't think that came up in there. And then, of course, I had a lot of their training videos, a lot of their paraphernalia, because I had talked to former members of the group, and because I had been working with the family, so I, had done a lot of research. And then when the local media found this out, of course, everybody, this was big news for quite a while. It's still the largest mass suicide on U.S. soil.
Wow.
And so the media were just, their vans were just lined up on my street, and the reporters were just hanging on my doorstep waiting for me to come out the door so they could interview me. And I guess it was really, my entree into doing all these media interviews and
20 years later, here you still are.
Trying to help people understand what these groups are all about.
In fact, the dissertation that you wrote that led to your book, Bounded Choice, was partially about Heaven's Gate. Isn't that right?
Yes. At the time when all this happened, I was in grad school, in a PhD program. And I was just at the phase where I was about to start the actual dissertation project. And my advisor, the chair of my committee, called me up and said, well, this is it. This is what you're doing your dissertation on. And I was like, oh, really? It seemed like that wasn't what I thought I'd be doing when I went to grad school. And then he said, yeah, you've got all this information. You've got firsthand information. You know all these people. And then he said, and it will actually be a far more effective dissertation if you do a comparative study rather than just one case study. So he recommended that I compare the Heaven's Gate cult to the political cult, the Democratic Workers' Party, that I had been in the 70s and 80s. I didn't necessarily want to go back there, but I felt that he had a point, that probably would be very effective. And when I thought about it, here you've got the group that I was in, which was a left-wing political group. We wanted to change the world. We wanted to, fight for social justice and get rid of racism and sexism and classism and, all those things that had to do with changing the world. And then you have this other group who all they wanted to do was leave this world. They thought this world was about to be destroyed. And so on some level, here's this hardcore Marxist intellectual group, and then here's this kind of new age, partially Christian, partially UFO kind of,
Your group thought you could redeem the world, but Heaven's Gate thought the world was beyond redemption.
Exactly. And so it was, you couldn't find two more different groups. So it actually was a very, very interesting study. So, what was interesting about the study, not just that the groups were so different, but the leaders were also so different. And I think that has something to do with how the two groups ended, because T and Do were kind of your mom and pop leaders, I mean, there were strict times, there were quote punishments, there were chastisements, but not at all to the degree that went on in the cult I was in. Our leader was an absolutely abusive, harsh, domineering personality. Criticism was mostly what we did all the time: criticize each other, criticize ourselves, etc. So what's interesting is that our group actually had our revolution in that we overthrew our leader and we dissolved the organization and expelled her. Well, we expelled her first, then we dissolved the organization. And the other group, went on for 20 some years and stayed loyal to their followers, to their leaders. And so it's one of the things I thought was interesting is that the group with the harsh leader ended up getting rid of her, whereas the group with the more subtle manipulative leaders kept their people loyal. So I think it says something about how how leaders can retain their followers by, the soft sell, I think, is a little more important. And then out of that, I developed this idea of bounded choice in showing that when people are in these enclosed, what I call self-sealing realities, they get to the point where they have so internalized everything about the leader's ideology and their loyalty to the leader that, in a sense, their free will is altered. Their free will is subsumed under the will of the leader or the will of the group. And so that's what bounded choice is about.
Well, it seems that Heaven's Gate is a thing of the past, but amazingly, there are still adherents to it even today. Isn't that correct? Yes,
there are still adherents. And that's not unusual. I mean, we see it with Nixium and the people who are still devoted to Raniere. We see it with David Koresh. There are still people waiting for David Koresh to come back. And so, yeah, there are still these believers some of who feel they missed their opportunity, as Sawyer said in the documentary. Mm-hmm. Some of them were former members when the group was in existence. Some of them are new people who've come tagging along. Yeah, it's sometimes hard for other people to understand that, but it's on some level it's like any other religion. Jesus is gone, Buddha is gone, Allah is gone. So it's not all that unusual, I guess.
Janja, what did the remaining members of Heaven's Gate think about the suicides that happened in '97? Did they think, oh, they did the right thing, or they missed the boat, or what? Well,
the ones who are still believers think, I think they absolutely think they missed the boat or they missed the ship. There are those who, committed suicide or tried to commit suicide afterwards to be able to join them, So, yeah, I think for a lot of them, that's still in their belief system. And, there've probably been other suicides related to that we've never really learned about.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Well, you're in demand quite a lot these days, as we've said. It seems that every time a major documentary or news show talks about cults, you're brought in as the expert on cults. So what is coming up for you? Is there anything that you can tell us about?
Well, I have lots of interviews lined up on into January and February on different podcasts, possibly a couple of other documentaries. There is a documentary coming out on, or a series coming out on ABC that where I'm was interviewed by Diane Sawyer, and that I believe that'll be coming out sometime in January. And I just finished a memoir, which I'm very excited about, and am in the process now of looking to get it published. It was my COVID project, my sheltered-in project. So if anything good came out of this, it's that it got me to buckle down and write this book that I've always wanted to write. I'm expert witness in a legal case that's coming up. So yeah, my plate is still pretty full.
And I know that a lot of my guests speak of your work as having helped them, people who have left cults, who I obviously interview a lot, and they always refer to Take Back Your Life as something that's really helped them sort of make sense of the world and to heal from their experiences.
Yes, and that's another big project. Right now, I'm in the process of getting Take Back Your Life put into audio form.
Oh, yes.
Because a lot of people, when they come out of cults, it's very difficult for them to concentrate. And so listening to a book would be easier than trying to sit down and read. So I've wanted to do this for years, and I finally am able to do it. I've found a production company. I have someone who absolutely most generously donated the money or at least most of the money that it'll take to do this. These projects cost thousands of dollars. The book will be read by Sarah Edmondson, who was the woman who kind of broke the story of the Nexium cult by showing her brand on the front page of the New York Times. And so I'm very excited that Sarah will be reading the book, and it kind of keeps it in the family. So that's another project that I'm working on right now that I think will be helpful. And one other thing that I'm doing, which I failed to mention, is that every other Saturday I co-facilitate workshop / support group for former cult members or survivors of some kind of abuse. And they're held on Zoom. I co-facilitate that with Colleen Russell, who's a local therapist who's very experienced. And they're 2-hour workshops, and they're just incredible. And we have people from your neck of the woods, from Scotland, from New Zealand, from across the country. It's really marvelous to have all these people being able to share their stories and help each other through the recovery that they need.
Yeah, that's the good thing about Zoom and StreamYard and all these platforms, is you can have people from all over the world, time zones notwithstanding, join you, which is fantastic.
Yes. Who would have known?
Well, as always, I want to thank you, Janja, for taking the time to come on to the show. I will leave links to your books as well as your social media in the description below. And all that's left to say is thank you once again for coming back on To Talk Beliefs.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm just so happy to be here. I've loved all the shows that you've done. I was so happy that I was actually able to meet you in person a few years ago when I was in London, and I applaud the work you're doing. And so I'm absolutely delighted to have been on your show again.
Thank you very much indeed.